What's up, everybody? This is part 2 of my Anatomy of a Villain series. In the first part, we analyzed the dark psyches of the Mad Titan, dwelled in the twisted motives of the Clown Prince of Crime, and tried to find meaning in Magneto's worldview. This episode would be no different. This time, I chose few more villains, just as devious, just as iconic as the previous ones. The first one I want to talk about is the Hair of Slytherin, the Noseless King, terrifying as the worst nightmare you can possibly imagine. Voldemort, once known as Tom Marvolo Riddle, the most powerful dark wizard of a century, although arguably weaker than Grindelwald, was so terrifying that no one dared even uttering his name and referred to him as you know who or he who shall not be named. Over the span of 3 decades, even more than that, he was able to build an army made of all sorts of magical creatures, spread fear in the hearts of every witch and wizard, establish a reign of tyranny. Only Harry Potter could stop him. But what's so fascinating about him? Well, Voldemort is not just typical bad guy. He's charming, cunning, a born manipulator with an exceptional intelligence and powers that far exceed what's considered conventional magic. Born from magic royalty, sure, but nonetheless in absolute squalor. His family were the last living descendants of Slytherin, only in name, as most of the wealth had been squandered a long time ago, leaving the Gaunt family without a penny or, you know, prized possession except for the infamous locket. His mother, Merope, fell in love with a person with no magical abilities, aka a muggle, from wealthy and respectable family of a nearby village. Naturally, the love was unrequited, leaving Merope no choice but to administer him a love potion, and well, the rest is history. Naturally, after many years, Merope thought Tom Riddle Sr. would have fell in love with her and decided to drop the farce and stop giving him the love potion. But the moment she did, Tom regained full consciousness, understood what happened, and ran back to his family, claiming he was bewitched. A beloved fan theory, later dismissed by J.K. Rowling herself, wants the loveless way Voldemort was conceived as the true reason he can experience or feel love, which would actually make a lot of sense. In the story, we hear about him in the first book and get to actually meet him in the end, but he doesn't come back until the Goblet of Fire, where he regains his body and his full powers. Where we can finally also understand why he's such a terrifying presence. He's presented as being lazy, pretentious, and extremely arrogant, like the made up title Lord suggests. Also, is defined by a cold, high pitched voice that would make the hair on your neck stand still. Emotionless eyes, red like blood. A villain true and true, literally no redeemable qualities and absolutely impossible to justify. But the true defining aspect of Voldemort is his fear of death, a fear that has turned his whole existence into a perpetual journey to find ways to avoid it and ultimately beat it. He started when he was really young and was trying to find out about his heritage. He assumed the father was a wizard because his mother succumbed to an early death that she could have avoided if she only raised her wand. Little did he know, her mother not only was a witch, but also one of noble origins, as she was so heartbroken after being abandoned by her husband, and I say that with air quotes, that she welcomed death as a relief from all the pain, even refusing to use magic to save herself, to look after the child. Now, this long exposure is to explain why Voldemort is who he is, and what's the driving force behind him. Suddenly, his search for objects to turn into Horcruxes, a magical sealed container for pieces of his soul, acquires a far deeper meaning. Voldemort loathes death, considers it a filthy thing that only defines muggles. He always saw himself as special, unique, something more than a mere human. Despised everything that makes him common or that other people could relate to, starting with his name, and that's why he was so ready to accept his magical abilities when Dumbledore first told him. Last bit about this, and I swear I'll move on to the next villain, or this will be a 3-hour video essay on Old Voldy. But I think it's essential to mention the ultimate irony. Voldemort was scared of death all his life and committed the most unspeakable crimes only to secure his body to eternal life, losing his soul in the process. In the end, at his most vulnerable stage, when Harry had already destroyed all the Horcruxes, Voldemort was hit by his own rebounding curse and died just like any other man. In J.K. Rowling's own words, he fell with a mundane fatality. The other irony is that Dumbledore, the only man he ever feared, and for good reasons, never made any Horcruxes that we know of, and lived well over 100 years, with an intact soul. Voldemort, on the other hand, destroyed his body and soul, lost himself in the darkest corners of magic, killed countless innocent people, all to barely make it past 80. Damn, that was a lot of content on Voldemort, and I had to restrain myself, believe me, as I want to discuss another great bad in this video. Oh, just to clarify, what I said about Voldemort is based on the books, as in my view, the movies don't really give him justice and severely downplay many aspects of this incredible villain. Now, next one, by a weird coincidence, is another noseless bastard. I'm talking about none other than Davy Jones, the captain of the Flying Dutchman. In particular, his portrayal in the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Even before we see him on screen for the first time, the way other characters talk about him with sort of like reverence and terrified look establish him as a powerful villain, incredibly skilled and without an ounce of mercy. This might make him seem like a conventional bad guy, but then we get to know about his backstory and how pain has shaped him to become who he is. He once was a man like many other, a common Scottish pirate, and though exceptional in his own right, and not a half man, half octopus hybrid, he was in love with a woman, the goddess of the sea Calypso, who entrusted him with the Flying Dutchman in exchange for Jones helping her ferry the souls of the dead to the afterlife. Calypso professed her mutual love for Jones and promised him to meet him again in 10 years' time and spend a day with him. Jones did as requested and worked tirelessly to fulfill Calypso's request, then went to meet her on the land where Calypso promised to join him, but she wasn't there. So, believing Calypso had betrayed him, an enraged Jones, with the help of another pirate, imprisoned her in the mortal body that we see in the movies. After that, Davy Jones carved his own heart and hid it in the chest everyone is looking for in the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and keeping the key on him at all times. This act against nature mutated the very essence of his being. Without a heart, he slowly turned into the cruel and horrible monster we see in that man's chest. A terrifying reminder of what going against the laws of nature does to your body and soul. This, I would say, is a big similarity between Voldemort and Davy Jones. Opposite sides of the same coin. One was born without love, never got to know what love is. A monster who didn't feel an ounce of regret, not even in his final moments. The other, a man who loved so much, the pain from losing it forced him to carve out his own heart not to feel love ever again. Voldemort, in a way, is the personification of evil. He's clearly inspired by dictators like Hitler and Stalin, with an easy analogy being his plan to have muggles overruled by wizards as considered, the superior race, which I'm sure will remind, of one of the worst chapter in human history, Shoah. Voldemort blames muggles for the decisions of the magic kind to live in the shadows, and wants to bring them out of exile by taking control of the world and ruling it by himself. But it's not just about power. He let his burning desire, his obsession for eternal life, poison his very core and became so detached from his human nature to become a mere shadow of a man. Voldemort never stood a chance. He was almost destined to be bad, to be detached from any positive human emotions. Davy Jones chose to live like this, deprived himself of love and took an evil path out of revenge for the love he got refused. So love in the end is the key to everything. Cheesy, I know, but you can't argue much with that. In Dumbledore's own words, love is the most powerful kind of magic. And he was damn right, considering it was love which saved Harry's life in more than an occasion. But love, can give and love can take. Some become heroes to protect who they love, and others become evil because they reject love and only care about themselves. So, that's it for today. Another episode of Anatomy of a Villain is done, and I can't wait to see you all in the next one.